welcome to my channel. I'm Momma Atheist, but you can call me Amanda. Originally, I was going to make a video on fracking after the comments made during the vice presidential debate a little over a week ago. While fracking is an important topic that the general public does not have the greatest grasp of, and I'll still be making that video anyway, there is something more important that I wanted to discuss with you today. As you all know, the presidential election in America is less than a week away. I apologize to those in my audience that are not from the United States. I try not to make my channel too America-centric, but unfortunately, this topic is not only incredibly important, but it affects the rest of the planet as well. At this point in time, most Americans know whom they're casting their vote for, if they haven't voted already. Side note, if you get a chance to vote early, do so. You'll encounter less of a crowd in most areas this way, and therefore less of a risk in terms of virus exposure. Anyway, the thing that concerns me are the people that have stated that they will either be voting third party or not voting at all because they just cannot get behind former Vice President Joe Biden. Look, I completely understand the sentiment. Biden is, to put it mildly, not great. He's contributed to questionable, if not downright awful policies in the past. He opposes Medicare for all. Quite frankly, Joe Biden is barely a Democrat, regardless of the radical leftist label that Trump keeps trying to push on him. Since he ran for president 5 years ago after Obama's second term, I've always referred to Biden as Republican light, because quite frankly, that is what he is. However, many people have pointed out, and I do not believe this to be hyperbole, that this is the most important presidential election of our lifetime, at least so far. There are many of our liberties that are under attack because of Trump. Female bodily autonomy, LGBTQ plus rights, immigration, healthcare, just to name a few. And yes, all of these things are incredibly important and should be taken into consideration when casting your ballot. However, I'm going to explain to you why our planet cannot withstand another 4 more years of the Trump administration. Since the moment Trump was sworn in as the 45th President of the United States, a phrase that still makes me gag 4 years later, science has been pretty much under attack in this country. One of the very first things that Trump officially did as president was to cut scientific funding, specifically that which was earmarked for climate science research. I know this because it greatly affected both my field of study and my job. Regardless of climate deniers' claims that people like me are paid off to lie about the changing climate, scientists do not tend to get paid very much to begin with. We scrape and save for every penny that we use. Trump's very first budget request to Congress for the fiscal year of 2018 included massive cuts to science. If you take a look at this graph, you can see that the top 5 biggest cuts to that budget were specifically made in areas regarding climate science, research and development. At the very top of the list, we have the ARPAE, or ARPA, which is the Advanced Research Projects Energy Agency. Doesn't exactly flow off the tongue, but let me explain what they are. According to their mission statement, ARPA-E advances high potential, high impact technologies that are too early for the private sector investment. ARPA-E awardees are unique because they are developing entirely new ways to generate, store, and use energy. Essentially, this is a government agency tasked with promoting and funding research and development of advanced energy technologies. What does this mean exactly? In 2 words, alternative energies. This was a governmental agency tasked with the research and advancement of sustainable green energy, something that is absolutely necessary for our future. As you can see in the graph, Trump wanted to completely do away with ARPA-E. Luckily, Trump didn't get his way in 2017, and ARPA-E was not only spared, but Congress allotted them $15 million more than they had received the year prior. In the 3 years since then, Trump has attempted to get rid of this government-funded energy research group every time he has proposed a new budget. The next 4 top slots on Trump's chopping block are the NOAA, or National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's research, where a lot of my job's funding comes from, EPA, Research and Development, the Department of Energy, and the EPA overall. Trump wanted to cut the EPA's funding by nearly a third. However, if you look at the very bottom of the graph, you can see that Trump wanted to add 11% to the U.S.'s nuclear defense budget, because that makes sense, right? I mean, it's nearly every year that we're in a nuclear war with some country or another, right? And the next agency on the chopping block was the National Institute of Health, which could explain a lot about our current circumstances. But I digress. The point here is that one of Trump's very first actions as president was a big fuck you to the fight against climate change, and he has only ramped up his attack on the field and science in general ever since. Back in April, Aaron Ra invited me on his channel to talk about the Trump administration's environmental policy rollbacks. I'll throw a link in the description below. This is one of the topics that, considering my job and proximity to the issue, I have a great deal more awareness of than the general public. Unfortunately, considering the shit show that the Trump presidency has been, and his attack on the environment got lost in the cacophony of other horrifying acts and policy changes. Personally, I do not think I've done a good enough job in sharing this information and making sure people are aware of how dire the situation actually is. Since becoming president, Trump has attempted to reverse a total of 99 environmental laws and policies. He has succeeded in rolling back a whopping 72 of them. With 4 more years in office, who knows what he will attack next? Here's a quick breakdown from the New York Times that shows the types of rule reversals that Trump has implemented, in what areas of environmental policy, and how many are either passed or in the progress of passing. As you can see, laws and policies regarding emissions are at the very top of the list. It doesn't exactly take a genius to recognize that these types of policies are a hindrance to the fossil fuel industry. Big Oil spends billions of dollars each year in fines, taxes, and regulations regarding the amount of emissions that they produce. Now, there is a reason for this. We know the impact of excess greenhouse gas emissions on our planet. And by having laws limiting fossil fuel industry's contributions to global emissions, it is a deterrent for those companies to continue to pollute without consequence. We also know that Big Oil is a huge Republican Party donor. So people like Trump and McConnell pay for their political careers in large part due to Big Oil. If they save Big Oil money, it means more money in their pockets as well. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science to understand why the Republicans lie about climate change and fight so hard to claim that it's a hoax. By protecting the fossil fuel industry, they are ensuring their political future and the power that comes along with it. It's a sickening prospect, really. The fact that the GOP will literally contribute to the destruction of this planet in order to hold on to power. But just like Trump said in regards to the pandemic, it is what it is. Trump and his cronies will continue to dismantle the EPA and all the planet-preserving environmental laws and policies put in place over decades in order to continue to be in charge. For fuck's sake, Trump's first appointed EPA head was Scott Pruitt, who not only dissolved Oklahoma's Environmental Protection Unit as Attorney General of that state in 2010, but also disagreed with the scientific consensus that humans cause climate change while acting chief of the United States' EPA. Trump's second appointment as the head of the agency, Anthony Wheeler, was a goddamned coal lobbyist prior to becoming part of the Trump administration. Our president actively appointed climate deniers as the head of our Environmental Protection Agency. He does not care about us, our future, or the future of this planet, and he's not exactly shy about this fact. His actions prove it. So let's talk about some of the environmental laws and policies that Trump has reversed since taking office. As I mentioned before, Trump has gone after 99 of these laws, regulations, and policies. He has succeeded in overturning 72 of them and has 27 more that he's working on reversing or repealing. Trump's reasoning behind his all-out attack on the country's environmental guidelines has been deemed to be a fight against Obama's anti-growth policies, economically speaking. You see, Trump thinks that any regulations requiring businesses to spend time or money upholding even the most basic environmental protections is a waste of said time and money and a hindrance to our economy. Read, money is more important to Trump than the future of this planet, and also we all know his mission to erase President Obama and everything that he did during his 8 years in office. Trump's entire shtick is that he is a businessman, not a politician. Therefore, he can drain the swamp while making us the richest and most powerful country on the planet. However, we all know that this is bullshit. For fuck's sake, the man has had more of his businesses go into bankruptcy than one could possibly think happen. If his leaked tax returns are to be believed, even his most profitable businesses, his golf courses, are losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Trump is just not a good businessman. The only reason he cares at all about our country's economy is because he knows that's how he makes money. His fight against our environment is not because he wants our country to grow and prosper economically. It is because he is in the pocket of big oil, and their donations mean more to him than his children and grandchildren's futures. As the wildfires rage across America, extreme weather events like hurricanes ravage our coasts, and the sea level dangerously rises, Trump continues to deny the reality of climate change merely for his own profit. Well, that and his personal vendetta against Obama. While Obama was nowhere near tough enough on the environment, he did very well placing us on the right path for change. He even rallied some of the member nations in 2015 into agreeing to joining the Paris Climate Agreement. But like most of Obama's progress, Trump has worked tirelessly to both burn it down and his legacy. This video would end up being hours long if I went through every one of Trump's environmental rollbacks. So for the sake of brevity, I will pick a few whose losses are the most impactful, starting with one of Obama's most important environmental policies he put into place, the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan, or CPP, was introduced by the EPA under Obama in 2014 and is considered one of the most important acts ever set into place to combat anthropogenic or man-made climate change. Under the CPP, each American state was assigned an individual goal for reducing carbon emissions by working directly with the EPA. This is important for a variety of reasons. First of which is that we need to understand that each state has different energy needs as well as producing varying amounts of emissions. Taking these things into consideration, the EPA as well as each individual state would decide not only how much they need to cut emissions, but how much they need to accomplish this task. In doing so, the goal as a country overall was to cut carbon emissions 32% by the year 2030, relative to 2005's emission levels. Once again, this was at the top of Trump's to-do list, as Obama's Clean Power Plan was gone by October of 2017, Trump's very first year in office. Another Obama-era policy that former president's fuel economy rules, specifically that which would make cars manufactured after 2012 have an average of 54 miles per gallon by the year 2024. This would have eliminated over 6 billion tons of carbon emissions from our atmosphere. Yet, Trump would not stand for this. After failing to get rid of the reduction altogether, Trump reduced the mileage to 34 miles per gallon by the year 2021. In fact, Trump went even further recently by revoking California's authority to set stricter emission rules than the rest of the country, citing that cars with higher emissions are cheaper and people needed a break during this economic crisis surrounding COVID. However, we know this not to be true because he has been fighting both California and New York's stricter emissions laws since at least the middle of 2019, long before the pandemic was a thing. Trump has also rolled back hard-set rules limiting methane production from oil and gas infrastructure. Methane is what is considered a super polluter, one whose emissions have even surpassed carbon dioxide in the last 100 years. These very simple, incredibly important rules set on oil and gas companies required them to merely fix any infrastructure issues that allow for methane to leak from their plants. Once again, citing this as a rollback to economic success, this one environmental rollback alone will allow for an extra 5 million metric tons of methane to leak into our atmosphere every year. By not fixing these leaks, oil and gas companies will be losing over $1 billion worth of wasted gas each year, which points in the opposite direction of Trump's economic recovery claims. One thing that most people are aware of is Trump's allotment of the Keystone XL oil sands pipeline as well as the Dakota Access pipeline. Fought and held off for years under the Obama administration for both the purposes of environmental protection as well as protecting the surrounding sovereign native land, Trump cleared the obstacles that stood in the path of those polluting pipeline monstrosities, and by doing so has set a dangerous precedent that will allow for future pipeline projects to be built and approved much easier than they used to be. In order for a pipeline to be approved in this country, it must pass years of environmental tests and studies in order to make sure that no significant damage will be done to the environment or any surrounding ecosystem. This is especially crucial when the area in which a pipeline is proposed to be built is home to any endangered species. Altering the environment in order to build one of those pipelines, as well as the possibility of any type of oil leak or spill, can completely destroy an already unstable ecosystem and the most vulnerable species inhabiting it. But to Trump, this doesn't matter. Speaking of endangered species, Trump has proposed and passed numerous environmental rollbacks regarding the handling of our Environmental Species Act. As you know, we are currently neck deep in what is known as the 6th mass extinction event, or the Holocene extinction. At a bare minimum, we are losing at least 30,000 species on this planet every year. Now, my specific job in climate science works directly with analyzing data regarding how climate change will affect different species, particularly those that are endangered or close to it. Once again, Trump is claiming economic consideration in regards to the way he's handling the Endangered Species Act. In other words, fuck the flora and fauna money is way more important. Trump is effectively weakening the protections set in place for endangered species in order to decrease regulatory burdens that stand in the way of economic progress. Over 200 species of plants and animals have been saved by the American Endangered Species Act, including the grizzly bear since its enactment in 1973. This graph here just shows just how many species are protected under this act, including the 37 species that were taken off of the endangered list because of laws that were put into place. Without protections, these species unfortunately faced imminent extinction. Closely related to the rollback is the way that Trump has treated protected land in America. Since he first stepped into office, Trump has waged a near all-out war on our country's national parks in order to, you guessed it, open those protected lands up to the energy industry. Trump doesn't see the Grand Canyon or Yosemite National Park, or you can't even pronounce if you recall.
Yosemites.
He sees millions of acres of untouched land that could potentially hold vast untapped fossil fuel reserves. Among these rollbacks included shrinking 2 national parks in Utah, opening national forests in Alaska for energy exploration, repealing the rule that stops mining companies from dumping their wastewater into river, what the fuck, and opening waters to drilling, opening Arctic waters to drilling, just to name a few. There is a reason we have national parks in America, and it is to preserve the land and its species, as well as allow for some untouched acreage to be left to our children. Not to mention the countless species that reside there in those ecosystems that are now under threat due to Trump's rollbacks. The list goes on and on. As I said earlier, I could be here for days listing all of Trump's environmental rollbacks and the long-term effects that they will have on our planet. What's really frightening is that we have no discernible clue how bad Trump has made things for our planet in the less than 4 years that he's been president. Even if Joe Biden were put into office tomorrow and reversed everything that Trump has done to our environmental laws and policies, at this point, it could be years or even decades until we're able to fix what he has broken, if ever. However, there is one more thing I'd like to mention that perhaps is the most globally detrimental of all of Trump's rollbacks, and that is him pulling America out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things wrong with Paris. Most people will agree that it does not go nearly far enough to fight climate change. There are a lot of holes in the plan as well. This is something I've discussed in a previous video, the link for which I'll leave below if I remember. However, it is a start, and an important one at that. As I've mentioned 1,000 times before, in order for us to save ourselves from this mess that we have made, and yes, climate change is our fault, we need to work together as a global community, not just as individual nations. It's that simple. Paris was a step in that direction, one that opens the door for the future, for a better climate and better global climate initiatives. One of the major things that Trump originally campaigned on was pulling America out of what he called the disastrous Paris Climate Agreement. Under the rules set forth in said agreement, the earliest our country could petition to pull us out was on November 4th, 2019. And that was the exact date he did so a year ago. After which it takes another full year for our country to leave the accord completely. That means that on November 4th of this year, exactly one day after the presidential election, the United States will no longer be a member country signed and beholden to the Paris Climate Agreement. What does that mean exactly? First of all, we need to look at the effect this has on the United States alone. With nearly all other countries on Earth signed on to Paris, the world is moving away from fossil fuels. America is the only country on Earth that still fights about the reality of climate change and also makes it a political issue. The GOP's desperate need to hold on to big oil money has stalled much of the progress here in regards to the fight against climate change. Instead of holding steadfast to environmental laws and regulations that protect our air and water, that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and slow the effect of climate change on our planet, we are still fighting not only whether or not climate change is anthropogenic, but whether it exists at all. Ignorant, crooked politicians still walk onto the floor of Congress with a snowball and exclaim, "What climate change?" And this kind of dangerous rhetoric only prolongs the inevitable, which is distancing ourselves from fossil fuels, as well as continuing to propagate the idea that we're still unsure of the reality of climate change and its causes. The rest of the planet, even third world countries, accept the reality of climate change and the need to fix what we have broken. This hurts our standing in the global community. As a superpower, the rest of the world looks to America to effect real change, to put money and effort forth towards scientific progress. Instead, the rest of the world is looking at us like the kid who broke the swing set, yet still expects the rest of the kids on the playground to fix it for us. The United States contributes 14% of the total global carbon emissions, and yet we only make up about 4.25% of the entire world's population. We are responsible for more than our fair share of the damage, yet we hide our heads in the sand and expect everyone else to clean up our mess. Our country will also miss out on the great economic advantages involved in shifting our energy needs to sustainables. Research shows that in an attempt to reach climate goals by the year 2030, alternative energies could net close to $26 trillion to countries embracing these new energy sources. Lastly, and most importantly, is what is at stake to the planet itself if we are not involved in the Paris Climate Agreement. To put it simply, our country being the second biggest greenhouse gas emitting country in the world, only after China, pulling out of the accord undercuts global efforts to curb the efforts of climate change on a massive scale. This includes both cutting worldwide emissions as well as transitioning toward alternative energies. Our allies in Europe specifically fought against our withdrawal from the accord because they felt it would greatly undermine the resolve other countries have to change, as well as weaken the enforcement measures pertaining to the agreement. Foreign policy expert and former Undersecretary of State R. Nicholas Burns stated that our withdrawal from the agreement, quote, will endanger U.S. national security and prosperity by sabotaging U.S. global leadership. Basically, what he's saying is that the rest of the world is less apt to trust us anymore. We are facing the biggest crisis our planet has ever seen. And a country of wealth, size, and power decides to bow out and let the rest of the country sort it out. It's not only unfair, it doesn't look very good as well. This also creates quite the power vacuum. The United States should be leading the way in the fight against climate change. We have the money, we have the technology, we have a vast networks of scientists like myself ready to throw everything they have at the problem. Instead, we are setting up China to be the world leader in the clean energy race, which gives them the power to affect a great deal of policy decisions for the entire planet. I mean, don't get me wrong, China has made great strides toward the fight against climate change and the advancement of green energy. But that doesn't mean that they are the right country for the job. Leaving the accord also makes it much harder for the rest of the world to reach the goals set in Paris. The way the Paris Climate Agreement works is by taking each individual member nation into consideration. This includes what their emission levels are and what the time frame they need in order to drop their emission levels to a manageable level. Because we are no longer accountable for a specific drop in emissions, other countries must make up that difference. Furthermore, cutting U.S. climate aid from the rest of the world will greatly inhibit third world countries from reaching their emission goals. The Paris Accord implements what is known as the Principle of Common but Differentiated Responsibilities, which simply means that first world nations that are more financially capable of reducing emissions and advancing climate research have a responsibility to help third world countries that are less able to do so. The entire point of a global climate agreement like Montreal, Kyoto, and Paris are all about working together to fight this common cause. Without our financial support, poorer, less capable countries are left to either get help from those nations with more limited resources and funding, or just simply defend for themselves. Lastly, and most importantly, is the fact that pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, we may very well miss our window to effectively mitigate the effects of climate change. Current projections show that we might have less than a decade to make the changes necessary to save our planet and the species inhabiting it. At the rate we're going, we could surpass the dreaded 1.5 degree Celsius temperature hike that is widely considered to be the point of no return for ensuring that we still have a future. For the time being, Paris is our best shot at stopping this from happening, and by shirking our responsibilities and leaving the heavy lifting to every other country on Earth but ourselves, the United States is making the rest of the world's job a whole hell of a lot harder, perhaps even impossible. But unfortunately, there is no way to know before it's too late for change. Look, I understand that Joe Biden kind of sucks. He's no one's first pick for president. Hell, he's not even my sixth pick. And as much as we'd all like to give the liberals a kick in the ass and send a statement to them saying that we'd rather have someone more progressive as the leader of the free world, this is just not that time to make that statement. The planet absolutely cannot take another 4 more years of Trump. By continuing to roll back every possible environmental law and policy in order to pander to big oil, as well as yanking us from what could effectively be the most important global agreement in human history, Trump has essentially doomed us all. What the hell can I do about it, you ask? Vote. That's it. It's that simple. There are a plethora of reasons that Trump should not be president. But this, our global fight against climate change, is the reason that he absolutely cannot be president any longer. DarkMatter actually made an analogy the other day that I felt was very fitting and summarized the situation perfectly. Now, imagine we're running a relay race with a partner. As the first runner, we sprint the entire distance of the track ahead of everyone else before we hand the baton off to our teammate. Then our teammate does not budge. In fact, he starts to run backwards opposite the tide of sprinting competitors. Trump is that teammate, essentially negating all the years of effort we put forth running that first lap around the track. We need someone that will run in the correct direction and move both our country and our planet forward into the future, saving the only home that we have and fixing that which we have broken. Thank you all for sticking with me through this long and somewhat fatalistic video. If you agree with me and stand behind what I've said here, perhaps share this with someone that you know might be on the fence about the subject. Otherwise, I'll see you all again very soon. I'm Momma Atheist, and don't forget, think critically. Bye.